They are the two most powerful countries of the 21st century, seemingly staring each other down and challenging one another from opposite sides of the vast ocean. On one side, there's the United States, firmly holding its position after more than 80 years as the leader of the Western world. On the other side is China, a rapidly rising nation, hungry for power, full of ambition, and gradually ready to engage in a real contest for the first time in generations. At this point in history, the tension is clear. Both sides seem ready to enter a new kind of Cold War, a cold but bitter rivalry. But what if it doesn't stay cold? What if it suddenly heats up before the Cold War even really begins? From tensions in Taiwan and the Philippines to an aggressive and combative White House, and a CCP that is growing stronger, more resilient, and at the same time expanding its nuclear stockpile. There's no guarantee that this decade will pass without a direct conflict between the US and China. So if this war breaks out in the coming years, how will it happen? What kind of military power will each side unleash? And where and how will the battles take place? And in the end, who will prevail? But before we begin, if you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this. Allies and location. Right at the start of this episode, let's clarify a very important point. The possible clash between the United States and China is not just a simple war. It can be compared to a World War-level conflict. It's not just because of the strength of the two countries involved, but also because of the number of alliances and military agreements that will surely come into play once the fighting begins. In other words, it's impossible for this to remain a fight between just two countries. Once it starts, the whole world will be drawn in. So before we break down the military strength of each side, we first need to talk about the most important factor. Who are their allies? For many decades, the United States has carefully built a very strong network of alliances throughout the Indo-Pacific. Right in China's own backyard, there are two very powerful countries that are allies of the US. Japan, which is located on the other side of the East China Sea, has been almost inseparable from America in terms of geopolitics for more than half a century. Meanwhile, South Korea, which is next to a state close to China, continues to grow stronger as it deepens its ties with Washington. These two countries are not just allies. They are also home to large U.S. military bases, where thousands of American soldiers are deployed. The presence of the U.S. in the Philippines should not be underestimated either. Across the 9 military bases here, American forces remain active, and Manila clearly considers itself an ally of Washington. Even Vietnam, which used to be their enemy, is now much closer to the U.S. after half a century. And then there's Taiwan. Although it is not officially recognized by the U.S. as a country, it is clearly considered a critical part of America's interests in the region. In practical terms, it is fully supported by the U.S. In addition, Australia and Thailand also have roles in this possible conflict. Because of the potential scale of the war, it won't just be Asia that will be affected. The NATO member countries in Europe will likely be busy with their own affairs, especially if Russia joins in as an ally of China. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, a separate conflict could break out. Israel and Saudi Arabia could possibly face Iran, which would further worsen the situation in the region. As for China, one of the first to enter the scene would be North Korea. Although its weapons are not as advanced, it has a huge number of soldiers, something that can be used in the brutal warfare of modern times. It's a country with nuclear weapons and is often considered close to China, even though at times it's also a headache for Beijing. But in times of war, it's almost certain that it will side with China. China also has ties with Pakistan and Indonesia, countries with their own strong militaries, but it's less certain whether they would directly join the war against the United States. Meanwhile, other allies of China like Myanmar are busy with their own problems. And when it comes to India, it's even more likely that it would oppose China rather than ally with it if it ever joins the war. Overall, based on location and allies, it's clear that the United States has a significant advantage. Even though China is very powerful within its own territory, it is surrounded by countries allied with the US, countries with strong militaries of their own, and in some of them, There are even American troops stationed there. In other words, while China is strong within its own territory, the United States holds a vast network of power that surrounds it. In the current situation, China, together with North Korea, seems to be surrounded and trapped in a very difficult position. If they want to directly challenge the United States, they need to break free from this predicament or find a way to change the entire game. And this is where Taiwan comes in. A small island, but with immense strategic value. It's a perfect battleground, literally right at China's doorstep. In addition, it's easier for the United States to send forces closer to China using their bases in Hawaii and Guam. Meanwhile, for China, it's almost impossible to do the opposite. They can't just easily get close to the American mainland or cross the vast Pacific. Overall, if a large-scale war breaks out, it will almost certainly happen in the following areas: South China Sea, East China Sea, Philippine Sea, and in the countries surrounding China itself. In other words, right in China's own backyard. If you analyze it, both countries have their own advantages and disadvantages. For the United States, a major benefit is that their mainland will not be directly affected. But in exchange for this, they need to move a massive military force to the other side of the world in a very short period of time. And while they're doing that, China and its allies will try to destroy the U.S. ships, planes, and supply lines while they're still on the way. For China, fighting on their own territory is a huge advantage. Their Air Force and Navy are closer. They can respond much faster, but there's a trade-off because their own land will be within reach of their enemies, and they won't just be facing America, but more than half a dozen of its allied countries as well. Armament and conditions. All right, we've already talked about who would be involved and where the war between the United States and China would take place. Now, let's talk about how the weapons and the broader military strength will be used by each side. For the sake of the bigger picture, we'll mention some important points about the allies who might possibly join the fight. But overall, we'll focus on the two superpowers that will make up most of the fighting forces. Let's start with China. It boasts over 2 million active soldiers, making it the largest armed force in the world. The People's Liberation Army Ground Force alone has around 1 million active soldiers, divided into 35 separate armies, and possesses all the characteristics of a modern military. The country has thousands of artillery and multiple rocket launchers, 4,000 modern main battle tanks, and hundreds of deadly attack helicopters, in addition to a large number of unmanned drones and other vehicles. Their air force is also one of the best in the world, with more than 250 fifth-generation stealth fighters along with hundreds of other air superiority and multi-role aircraft, 200 light bombers, and over 200 copies of the twin-engine heavy bomber Jian H-6. They also have a complete set of reconnaissance, logistical, and airborne control aircraft, as expected from a modern superpower. Meanwhile, their rocket force, a separate branch of the military, is responsible for the massive number of cruise, ballistic, and hypersonic missiles. China's entire maritime force is composed of 3 separate forces: the main navy, the powerful Coast Guard, and a maritime militia. In total, they have over 700 surface vessels, including 3 aircraft carriers, more than 120 destroyers and frigates, and a large number of attack submarines. They also have special ships that can build bridges from sea to land, and hundreds of civilian ferries that can be used to transport tanks and soldiers, strengthening China's capability in amphibious operations. On the other side of the conflict is the United States, with approximately 1.3 million active soldiers and the most advanced military technology in the world. Like China, the U.S. also has thousands of self-propelled howitzers. Howitzers, towed artillery, and multiple rocket launchers support the 450,000 active soldiers, and an additional 500,000 from the National Guard. The U.S. has thousands of modern main battle tanks ready for use, reaching over 8,000 when including reserves along with various types of combat vehicles, and nearly 1,000 attack helicopters. The United States Air Force has over 600 fifth-generation fighter jets, including 165 operational units of the F-22 Raptor, which is often considered the best air superiority aircraft ever made. These are supported by over 1,000 other fighter and attack aircraft, as well as 3 types of strategic bombers, including 18 operational units of the B-2 Spirit. The United States is unmatched when it comes to logistical and support capabilities in the air, and this advantage is only growing. Thousands more Navy and Marine Corps combat and support aircraft further reinforce this. When it comes to the Navy, it has an impressive 11 aircraft carriers in addition to more than 100 other surface combat vessels, out of a total of approximately 460 ships in service. Meanwhile, the Marines will bring nearly 170,000 soldiers focused on amphibious and expeditionary warfare, along with their own long list of military equipment, which will surely inflict severe damage on the enemy. And while experimental assets like America's F-47 or China's J-36 are not yet heavily involved in combat because they are not fully developed, there is another very important asset the U.S. has: the B-21 Raider, a more advanced strategic stealth bomber that is currently being built and is expected to have several operational units within the next few years. In this battle, the allies of each country also have important contributions. North Korea, which sides with China, has 1.3 million active soldiers, almost as many as the US, even without considering China itself. Japan, on the other hand, has a significant contribution on land, sea, and air. Powerful armored units on the ground, 2 light aircraft carriers, numerous destroyers and frigates, and hundreds of modern fighter aircraft. South Korea, even with only 500,000 active soldiers, has over 3 million reservists, more than 2,500 modern tanks, a large number of artillery, and enough air power to keep up. Australia, on the other hand, although its military is small, is known for its high-quality training and modern capabilities. Meanwhile, Thailand, Vietnam, and Taiwan, when combined, have more than 1.6 million active soldiers. Along with sufficient equipment and capabilities to be an important part of a large-scale war, but weapons are not all that matters in war. The so-called home front is also very important. The ability of a country to support itself while in the midst of war. On China's side, it has been preparing for a long time. For many generations, the country has invested in the concept of dual-use technologies, systems that can be used in both civilian and military applications. From manufacturing capacity, social control, and censorship, to agricultural production. All of these can be quickly converted to support the war effort on short notice. It is also believed that the citizens of China are more prepared for the possibility of war, or at least as prepared as any population. And they are under a government that is experienced in maintaining order even in the midst of severe crises. On the other hand, the United States is less prepared in this aspect. After several decades of declining manufacturing capacity, it is no longer as easy for America to immediately shift to full war production compared to the time of World War II or the Cold War. In addition, there is a big question whether the citizens of the U.S. who are politically divided and used to living comfortably in one of the richest countries in the world would be ready or able to endure a prolonged war. In the past few months, the new leadership in Washington has caused doubts among their allies in other countries, introducing unnecessary instability and uncertainty into America's global support networks, and reducing the Allies' trust in the U.S.'s ability to support their friends abroad. Critical production shortages such as shipbuilding and artillery. The shell shortages are only just beginning to be addressed, and there is so much work to be done that it will likely take almost a decade before things become fully operational. And that's even the optimistic estimate. Meanwhile, China has pushed its shipbuilding capabilities to a higher level, continuously producing a large number of vessels, while its vast arms industry demonstrates its ability to manufacture high-quality military equipment. At the same time, they have built airports and seaports throughout the Pacific Ocean, often hidden under civilian construction projects. But their dual-use potential is clear, giving China access to islands in the Pacific in times of war. Because of this, their logistical capacity and ability to directly control a wider geographical area than China's limited mainland would suggest are increasing. There are also some intangibles to consider. The United States is currently in a state of self-admitted waning military readiness, which means it is no longer as quick and ready to act as it used to be. On the other hand, although China's true combat readiness is uncertain, it is believed that they prioritize loyalty over competence in the promotion of their leaders as a mechanism to prevent a coup. Although they have demonstrated tactical and strategic awareness in military exercises, there is still room for improvement. However, it is likely that China will be the first to decide to go to war, because its ambition to conquer and subdue Taiwan is clear compared to the US, which has little interest in directly attacking China. The preparedness of China's forces is more questionable. The US has spent decades waging war in different parts of the world and serving as a worldwide security guarantor, which has given its troops critical experience that China cannot match. This means that China's untested strategy in war could encounter problems or fall apart when faced with actual combat. Another problem for China is the widespread corruption within its military, which seems to persist despite recent crackdowns. On the other hand, the US has its own problem in the form of domestic political turmoil, which could escalate to the point where China decides to play the long game, as is their usual tactic. Wait and let the polarized United States divide and weaken on its own. Another reason for China to play the long game is their population. Their population continues to age, and it's unlikely they would accept the loss of hundreds of thousands or possibly millions of their youth in an unnecessary war. We should also mention two recent statements from the US that some politically attuned viewers might already know. The first is from the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. In an interview, he said that Chinese hypersonic missiles could destroy 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of war, and that the US loses to China in every war game. But there are some reasons why we shouldn't take this literally. War games are usually set up to favor one side. Weapons that have not yet been used in real combat are considered at the highest threat level so that no one is caught off guard. We also don't know the context in which Hegseth made his statement. We should also mention that as Secretary of Defense, Hegseth has a real incentive to show and say that America's current defense has major weaknesses. Why? Because when the public is concerned about the weaknesses of the US, it becomes easier to explain and justify future military spending. Another statement comes from Donald Trump, and this is the opposite of what Hegseth said. According to him, we have equipment that neither Putin nor Xi has ever heard of. No one knows about it. What we have is amazing. There are systems that no one knows about. Clearly, we can't deny that it's possible the US has a superweapon or two hidden away. But for our analysis today, there is no concrete data that can be used as a basis, especially since we don't know if it's true. Why was it said? Or if the statement is even serious? That's why we can't include it in our analysis. In this context, I hope it's clearer to you why we chose not to take either of the two statements seriously.